Hello, my dear. From household soap and cracked from years of work, were now well groomed with a neat manicure. In them, I held a worn dark brown leather briefcase with frayed edges, a relic from my previous life, a life my son knew nothing about. The district courtroom was packed to the brim. The stuffy October air, thick with the smell of nervousness, cheap cologne, and damp wool, settled on the skin like a sticky film. Dampness seeped in through the half-open window. Outside it drizzled, the typical long autumn rains of central Russia, turning the city into a gray, dreary place. I slowly looked over the attendees. There sat people I was used to seeing in different circumstances. My neighbor from the fifth floor, Klavdia Stepanovna, a gray-haired woman with eternally pursed lips, and the kind of face that seemed to believe the world owed her something. She always turned away from me in the elevator, especially after my son spread rumors about my unstable behavior. Today, she watched with open curiosity. Her beady little eyes drilled into me. Near her sat old Mikhail Yefremovich from the housing office, skinny as a skeleton, with age spots on his balding head, always complaining about leaks in his meager pension. In his hands was a worn folder, probably filled with documents meant to compromise me. Maybe it was complaints that never existed. No noise, no trouble, though I had lived quietly for years lower than the grass. In the third row, I noticed our district police officer, Pavel Gennadievich, who had recently come to inspect my living conditions at my son's request. Still a young man, though, already with a growing belly and eyes that had seen too much human meanness. He pretended to study some papers, but I noticed how he kept sneaking glances at me over the sheets. A rattling whisper ran through the rows as I passed the benches toward the defense table. The wooden floor, still from Soviet times, creaked under my small-heeled shoes, suddenly loud in the electrified silence. At the table sat the court-appointed lawyer, a young man of about 25 with tired eyes, dark circles beneath them, and a carelessly tied tie that badly needed ironing. Beside him lay a folder stuffed with notes and bent, disorganized papers. He looked at me without the slightest interest, as though I were just another old woman whose children wanted to free up some living space. He had handled dozens of such cases. A typical story of our times: grown-up children, forgetting love, cynically discarding parents as burdens in exchange for extra square meters. "Are you a relative?" he asked indifferently without lifting his head. "This is a closed session, only Tamara Nikolaevna." I cut him off. "The defendant in this case." He looked up, faintly confused. "But they told me the accused would not be attending, that," he mumbled, squirming in his chair. "As you can see, I'm here," I replied, setting my briefcase on the table. "I intend to defend myself." At that moment, I hadn't yet looked at the judge's chair. I was focused on my breathing. Inhale. Fill your lungs from the bottom to the top. Feel the diaphragm expand. Exhale slowly, controlling each second, so the air empties the lungs completely without catching in the throat as a treacherous lump. My mentor, Valentina Petrovna, had taught me this back in the 80s, when I had just begun working and shook with fear before public speaking. "Tamara," she would say, adjusting her perfectly styled hair, "keep your back straight and breathe deeply. No one will notice your fear. Juries believe only those who believe in themselves, and they judge only those who know the law better than they do." Valentina Petrovna, I wondered if she was still alive. We last met at my husband's funeral 15 years ago. She had been old even then, but still upright as a string, sharp-eyed and sharp-minded. The worn leather of my briefcase creaked as I touched it. Its brass lock still bore the scratch from when I carried files on the Karina gang, a ruthless killer who terrorized the city in the 90s. The snap of the lock sounded unexpectedly loud, silencing the courtroom. Forgive me, but who are you? The young lawyer asked again, now nervously adjusting his crooked tie. You mean you know I'm the accused, but you thought I wouldn't come because my son convinced everyone I was just a crazy old woman, incapable of taking care of myself. I finished quietly, but with weight in every word. Don't worry, young man. I am perfectly aware of what's happening and ready to defend myself. He tried to object, but at that moment the court secretary, a plump, middle-aged woman in a strict suit with her hair pulled into a tight bun, stood up and announced in a loud, sharp voice, "All rise. Court is in session." Chairs scraped, coughs echoed, clothes rustled, someone's keys clattered to the floor. I straightened, shoulders back. I am 58, but my back is still straight. I do not stoop, like many of my peers who seem to bend under life's weight trying to hide from it. For me, posture was habit, confidence, and confidence meant victories. The judge entered. A gray-haired man in his 60s, with a neat beard, thinning at the temples, and large veined hands. He wore a black robe, threadbare at the elbows, and old-fashioned glasses with a thin metal frame. I recognized him instantly, though more than 30 years had passed. Semyon Arkadievich. He lowered himself into his cracked brown leather chair, which groaned under his weight. His gaze swept slowly across the courtroom, lingered on my son, sitting across the aisle from me with a smug look, and finally stopped on me. At first, there was no recognition in his eyes, just the usual detached stare of a judge. But then our eyes met. For a moment, time stretched, our lives, the decades, collapsing into that one look. His pupils widened, the wrinkles around his eyes smoothed in surprise. His mouth opened slightly, as though to speak, but failing to find words. Then suddenly the judge stood up. His glasses slid down his nose, his eyes wide with shock, disbelief, almost mystical awe. "It's her," he shouted, forgetting all the dignity and coldness a judge should have. "Tamara Nikolaevna!" The room fell into a stunned silence, thick as a blanket muffling every sound. Only the old mechanical Soviet clock on the wall ticked, marking the seconds of my small triumph. Tick-tock, tick-tock. 30 years had passed, yet Semyon Arkadievich recognized me instantly. First love? Mortal enemy? Perhaps both. My son Igor flinched as though shocked by electricity. His expensive asphalt gray suit, clearly beyond a school physics teacher's means, suddenly looked ridiculous, like it had been borrowed. His shirt collar seemed to choke him. He nervously tugged at his tie. Panic flashed in his movements like an animal cornered. He looked helplessly at his wife Violetta, who sat in the front row in a cream-colored dress with a turquoise brooch, bought with her own money, a gift from her doting mother-in-law last New Year's. The brooch trembled with the rhythm of her quickened breathing, like a living creature ready to fly away. Her predatory face, with its thin lips, usually perfectly painted, looked smeared today, probably from rushing. They had barely made it to the courtroom on time. Now her expression was frozen in bewilderment and poorly hidden fear. I could almost hear her frantic thoughts. Who is this woman? Why does she look like that? Where did that suit come from? Why does the judge know her? What is happening? Is our plan really falling apart? Beside Violetta sat a young law student intern from the Human Rights Office where my son worked, a girl with slicked back hair and freckles on her pale face, dressed in a strict but cheap suit. She scribbled quickly into a notebook decorated with kittens on the cover, oblivious to how fast all their plans were crumbling before their eyes. No one in that courtroom had guessed who I really was. Not my neighbors, who thought I was just a lonely retiree with a sour character. Not the district officer who condescendingly listened to my complaints about upstairs noise. Not the social workers who visited at my son's request. Not even my own son, who had grown up never knowing the truth about my past. And now, he had filed a claim to declare me legally incompetent so he could seize my apartment in the city center, a 3-room flat with high ceilings and ornate moldings, overlooking the river and the old park founded in Catherine's reign. An inheritance from my parents, who had spent their lives as doctors, rewarded for their selfless work during an epidemic. He and Violetta planned to sell it for good money. I had overheard them in the kitchen one evening when they thought I was asleep, lulled by weak tea. At least 6 million, easily, Violetta whispered, drumming her nails excitedly on the table. Just think, we can take a mortgage for a country house, buy a new car, send Kirill to private school. And your mother. We'll send her to that nursing home on the city's industrial outskirts, where the air stinks of chemicals and the view is nothing but gray warehouses and smokestacks. Good care, Mom, Igor had said in a mock gentle voice. Nurses, doctors, people your age. You'll be better there than alone in that big apartment. An old useless mother, a burden, an obstacle to their happiness. Me, the one who had stayed up all night when he was sick as a child. The one who denied herself everything so he could study at a good university. The one who, after her husband's death, carried the family alone, working 3 jobs, coming home past midnight with swollen legs, yet still finding the strength to check his homework. Igor had even brought witnesses. My district therapist, Nina Fedorovna, who had visited me twice in 5 years, and some shifty-eyed psychiatrist who introduced himself as a specialist, though he had never even seen me. He was ready to sign a conclusion declaring me incapable of living independently. Early-stage senile dementia, he muttered. I had listened from the kitchen, pretending to make tea, while secretly recording their conversation on an old tape recorder from the same hiding place where I'd found my suit. Typical evidence: forgetfulness, sloppiness, emotional instability, paranoia, aggressive outbursts. Forgetfulness, like when I once didn't hear the phone because I had dozed off. Sloppiness, like when I stopped dyeing my hair and wearing decent clothes, as Igor said, embarrassed by me in front of colleagues. Emotional instability, like when I cried after overhearing him on the phone. It'll all be over soon. The case will be settled, and we'll be free of this burden. A couple more months at most. The judge's secretary whispered something in his ear, tugging at the sleeve of his robe as if trying to bring him back to reality. Semyon Arkadyevich came to his senses and sank back into his chair, putting on the mask of judicial formality. But his eyes still shone, like those of a boy who had just found his long-awaited New Year's gift rustling under the tree. I apologize, he said, now calmer, though his voice still trembled, betraying his excitement. I declare a 15-minute recess due to technical reasons. Everyone must leave the courtroom. But before striking the gavel, he added softly, yet loudly enough for the first row to hear, such coincidences don't happen. Fate is no different. The courtroom buzzed like a disturbed beehive. People began to rise, murmur, and cast curious glances at me. Some were openly hostile. Violetta furiously whispered into Igor's ear, clutching his elbow with her thin fingers, her long nails painted in burgundy lacquer. Her whisper hissed like an irritated snake. My son looked as if he had swallowed a lemon. His lips pressed into a thin line, his face growing even paler, taking on a greenish hue under the harsh fluorescent lights. I sat down and opened my old leather briefcase, the one I had kept in the attic along with other things from a past life, in a cardboard box with Yugoslavian boots bought back in the 1980s. Igor had never once looked inside, dismissing it all as old junk, sneering at the items that held our family's memories. My hands did not tremble, though inside everything turned over from anxiety. So many years spent hiding the truth, and now it would be revealed just like this. But there was no other choice. When your own son betrays you, you have only one option left: to defend yourself with every means available. I pulled out a folder with documents and a photograph I had cherished all these years, guarding it like the greatest treasure. In the photo, yellowed with time, Semyon Arkadyevich and I, young, smiling in our prosecutor's uniforms, stood on the steps of the regional administration after the high-profile child abduction gang case that shook the entire country. I was a slim girl with short hair and a determined gaze. He was fit, with thick hair and a confident smile. On the back was a faded inscription in blue ink: to the best prosecutor's investigator, from a grateful colleague. May 1995. 30 years ago. A lifetime. A life full of twists, ups and downs, pain and love. A life no one suspected, looking at a modest woman in a washed-out robe, mopping school hallways. But let me tell you everything from the beginning, about my quiet life as a school janitor after leaving the prosecutor's office, about how it turned into a war with my own son, and about how the past, which I had so carefully buried, came back to save me. The past I had fled from all these years, but which turned out to be the only weapon against betrayal by the person closest to me. It all began half a year ago, on a cold March evening. I had just returned from work. My hands still smelled of chlorine, my back ached with fatigue. Friday cleanings at school were always the hardest. By the weekend, the children seemed to go wild, leaving behind complete chaos, especially the high schoolers, who couldn't manage to toss their candy wrappers in the bin or wipe up spilled tea in the cafeteria. I set the kettle on the stove, an old enamel one with painted cornflowers on the side, inherited from my mother. I switched on the tiny Reuben TV in the kitchen, as old as Igor, still miraculously working. The news had just begun. Today, the city court issued a verdict in the high-profile case of apartment fraud against lonely pensioners, the announcer droned. Just then, the doorbell rang, persistent, demanding, as if the caller had every right to barge into my home at any moment. I knew who it was. Igor, my only son who hadn't visited me in nearly 3 months, limiting himself to rare Sunday calls and customary holiday greetings. They stood at the door, Igor and Violetta. He wore an expensive coat, his temples already thinning, a belly beginning to show, so unlike the curly-haired boy I once cradled in my arms. She wore a fashionable beige coat, her hair perfectly styled, her lips painted with bright red lipstick that made her thin mouth look freshly cut. "Mom, we need to be serious. Let's talk," Igor said, stepping into the apartment without asking permission. I silently moved aside, letting them into the hallway. Violetta smelled of expensive perfume and cold arrogance. She surveyed my old entryway with its wallpaper from Gorbachev's era, curling her lips. "There's a particular smell here," she remarked, wrinkling her nose delicately. "Dampness, perhaps? Not a healthy environment for an elderly woman." I swallowed the lump of hurt in my throat. Elderly. So that's what women over 60 are now called. In their eyes, I was already written off, an old crone, though I was still strong and sane. "Come to the kitchen," I said. "The kettle just boiled." They exchanged a strange glance. Igor coughed. "Better let's talk in the living room, Mom. This is serious." We went into the spacious living room with high ceilings and old furniture that had seen better days. Bookcases filled with Soviet and foreign classics. A sofa with worn upholstery, covered with a knitted plaid. A round table draped with a lace tablecloth crocheted by my grandmother. Once Igor had done his homework there, but now I looked at it like a museum relic of no value. "Mom, Violetta and I have been thinking. We've decided you need help," he began without sitting. "We see how hard it is for you, working as a janitor. At your age, it's disgraceful." "It's honest work," I replied calmly, "clean and honest." "But why?" Violetta interrupted, dropping into an armchair and crossing her legs. "You have your pension. Igor helps sometimes. Sometimes. 5,000 rubles at New Year's, the same on my birthday." I kept silent. "The thing is, Mom," Igor continued, avoiding my eyes, "we found an excellent place for you, a private nursing home. It's called Golden Autumn, great conditions, medical care, 3 meals a day." "I'm not going anywhere," I cut him off. "This is my home." "Mom, be reasonable," his voice hardened. "You live alone in a huge apartment I can't afford to maintain. You're having memory problems. The neighbors complained you left the water running. What if there's a fire? What if you fall and no one helps you?" I looked at my son and didn't recognize him. When had he become so cold, so alien? "I can manage myself," I said, "and my memory is fine. As for the neighbors, this must be Klavdia Stepanovna making things up. Her own mind isn't all there." Igor cast a triumphant glance at his wife. "You hear that? Paranoia already. Enemies everywhere." Violetta nodded, lips pressed in false sympathy. "Tamara Nikolaevna, we care about you," she cooed. "Igor loses sleep at night worrying. At the nursing home, you'll be comfortable. We've already arranged everything. A separate room, a TV. On what grounds did you arrange anything?" I snapped, rage rising in me. "This is my home, my life. Mom, I'm your only relative," Igor said, perching on the armrest beside his wife. "I'm responsible for you by law. If it's determined you can't make decisions on your own." I couldn't believe my ears. "You want to declare me incompetent?" "Only if you're stubborn." He spread his hands. "We're offering a civilized solution. You move to the nursing home, and your apartment can be rented to cover expenses. Or sold," Violetta added, biting her tongue as Igor shot her a warning look. And there it was, the truth. They wanted my apartment. A 3-room Stalin-era flat just steps from the city center overlooking the park. Worth millions today. "Get out," I said quietly. "Mom, don't start. Get out. Now." They exchanged glances. A flicker of fear flashed in Violetta's eyes. She hadn't expected such resistance. "We'll leave," Igor said solemnly. But think about our proposal. Otherwise, we'll have to go through court. Believe me, no one needs that. When the door closed behind them, I sank onto the sofa and burst into tears. For the first time in many years, I allowed myself to cry. From hurt, from betrayal by the person dearest to me, from the crushing realization of my loneliness. The kettle in the kitchen had long since gone cold, yet I still sat hugging my shoulders as if trying to keep warm. A phrase from the news echoed in my head: apartment fraud against lonely pensioners. Was my own son capable of this? Had all those years of sacrifice and self denial led to betrayal by my own blood? I knew they wouldn't back down. Igor had always been stubborn, Violetta calculating. They would start their maneuvers, and I had to be ready. The following weeks confirmed my fears. First came the district policeman, just to check if everything was fine. Then a social worker, a young girl with a folder of papers and a practiced smile. Then neighbors began to look at me strangely, whispering behind my back. I overheard fragments: completely lost her mind, drives her children away, getting aggressive. I realized Igor was preparing the ground, gathering evidence of my incompetence. And then something happened that finally opened my eyes. One May morning, sorting through old things in the attic to calm myself. Cleaning always helped ease my anxiety. I came across a box I hadn't opened in years. Inside were items from my past life, a life Igor knew nothing about. Old photographs, newspaper clippings, IDs coated in the dust of time, and a diary. A thick, leather-bound notebook where I once wrote my thoughts about investigations. I sat down right there on the floor, forgetting my aching knees, and began leafing through the yellowed pages. April 15th, 1992. The case of embezzlement of state funds has been transferred to court. The suspects confessed. Semyon congratulated me on the successful conclusion. He said I have a great future in the prosecutor's office. October 3rd, 1994. Investigation of the chicken gang case has begun. I'm afraid I won't cope. Too many victims, too cunning an enemy. Semyon believes in me more than I believe in myself. February 27th, 1995. The court delivered its verdict. All gang members received maximum sentences. Chicken swore revenge on me and my family when he gets out. Semyon says I must be careful. As I turned the pages, I felt myself becoming that same Tamara Nikolaevna again, the young prosecutor's investigator, with the reputation of an unyielding fighter for justice. A woman unafraid to challenge the most dangerous criminal city, solving dozens of serious crimes and putting bandits behind bars. And then came the tragedy that forced me to leave service, burying my past, starting a new quiet life under another name. The life of a simple woman raising her son alone, after her husband's mysterious death. A life without chases or shootouts, without accusatory speeches or interrogations. Just work as a janitor, endless saving, and caring for the only child. And now this child, for whom I had sacrificed everything, wanted to deprive me of the last thing I had left: my roof, my dignity. As I sifted through the things in the box, I found a business card tucked between the diary's pages: lawyer Mikhail Rogov and a phone number, written in faded ink. Mikhail had been Semyon's friend, helping us in several cases. I wondered if he was still working. I picked up the phone and dialed the number, not really expecting an answer. After a few rings, a hoarse male voice came through. Rogov's law office. I'm listening. My heart sank. He was still practicing. Mikhail Efimovich? I asked uncertainly. It's Tamara. Tamara Nikolaevna. There was a long pause on the other end. The very same Tamara Nikolaevna, he finally said with open astonishment. From the prosecutor's office. The one who disappeared back in '96. That made me smile in spite of myself. I need your help, Mikhail Efimovich. Urgently, we agreed to meet that same day. He was no longer young, but he was still practicing, mostly through consultations. When he saw me at the cafe where we had agreed to meet, his eyebrows shot up. My God, I can't believe it, he exclaimed, taking off his glasses and wiping them with a handkerchief. You've changed. I smiled bitterly. It's been 30 years, Mikhail Efimovich. I've grown old. No, it's not the age, he hesitated. It's just, the Tamara I remember was different, tougher, more decisive. It's like you've deliberately made yourself invisible. That's exactly what I've been trying to do all these years, I replied. To be invisible, to blend into the crowd, to disappear from the radar of those who could harm me. And it had worked too well. Even my own son saw me as nothing more than a helpless old woman. I told Mikhail everything about Igor's visit and his threats, about his attempts to declare me incompetent, about the apartment he wanted to take away. Bastards, he muttered after listening. Your own son. But don't worry, Tamara Nikolaevna, they won't succeed. First of all, your mind is sharp and your memory is intact. Any examination will confirm it. Second, he leaned closer and lowered his voice. Once your past comes to light, they'll regret ever crossing you. You're a legend, Tamara Nikolaevna, the best investigator in the region. People still remember you. It's been 30 years, I objected. Who would remember deeds from back then? You'd be surprised, he squinted slyly. Do you know who currently presides over the city court? Semyon Arkadyevich, your former colleague, if I'm not mistaken. A big admirer of Semyon. My heart ached at the memory. We had been more than just colleagues. There had been a spark between us, but duty had always come first. And then came that story with my husband, and I disappeared from his life without even saying goodbye. If the case reaches him, Mikhail began. No, I shook my head firmly. I don't want to rely on old connections. I want a fair fight. Help me prepare legally. What can I do to protect myself? We sat in that cafe for hours. Mikhail explained my rights, told me about the procedure for declaring someone incompetent, what kind of evidence could be used, and its pros and cons. Together, we put together a plan of action. The first step, collect proof that I was of sound mind and capable of taking care of myself. The second, document the pressure from my son. The third, prepare for a possible trial. Most important, don't fall for provocations, Mikhail advised as we parted. They'll try to drag you out, provoke aggression or erratic behavior. Don't let them. I went home with the feeling that a new chapter of my life was beginning. A chapter where I'd have to recall everything I'd learned during my years in the prosecutor's office. Recall and apply it to defend myself against my own son. A week later, a court summons arrived. Igor had wasted no time and filed a petition to declare me incompetent on grounds of senile dementia. The case, as the court clerk informed me, was assigned to Judge Semyon Arkadyevich. Fate, coincidence, or maybe part of a plan I hadn't even shared with Mikhail. Either way, I was ready for battle. A battle for my dignity, my home, and for justice. And if winning required me to reveal the secret I had guarded for 30 years, so be it. After meeting Mikhail, it felt as though I'd woken up from a long sleep. The years I had spent in a quiet, invisible role dissolved like morning fog. Tamara Nikolaevna, prosecutor's investigator, scourge of the criminal underworld of the 90s, had awakened in me once more. The first thing I did was order my documents. I pulled out my old folder with my law degree, Igor's birth certificate, and the apartment papers. I organized everything neatly in files, numbered them, made copies, then placed the originals in a bank safe, just in case Igor tried to break into my apartment and steal them. Haven't seen you in ages, Tamara Nikolaevna, smiled the elderly bank clerk, who had known me since the branch first opened. Here's the account for Igor. How's your grandson, Kirill? I couldn't help but smile, remembering the mischievous, freckled boy who had so resembled Igor in his childhood. He's growing up. We just rarely see each other, I replied. Ah, today's youth. She sighed as she took my documents. I left quickly. No time to linger. I thought to myself, you look back, and suddenly your grandchildren are grown. You've grown old, and your own children are trying to shove you into a nursing home. Next step, a medical commission. I signed up for a full checkup at a private clinic. Expensive, but independent. I took all the tests, had an MRI, spoke to both a neurologist and a psychiatrist. The results were clear. I was fully competent. No signs of dementia or cognitive impairment. You have a sharp mind and excellent memory for your age, noted the psychiatrist, a man in his 50s with a keen look. It's even surprising considering. He hesitated. Well, people of your generation usually carry heavy work histories. Stress often leaves its mark. I nearly laughed. If only he knew the kind of stress I had endured in my youth, interrogating armed criminals, receiving death threats, nightly ambushes. Compared to that, working as a school janitor had been like a spa retreat. I've got strong nerves, doctor, was all I said, hiding a smile. I placed the medical conclusions into the safe as well, sending copies to Mikhail. Excellent, Tamara Nikolaevna, he said approvingly over the phone. That's our first line of defense. Now we need to gather proof of your son and his wife's pressure. That was harder. Igor was smart enough not to leave obvious evidence. No threatening texts, no insults in front of witnesses. Everything was done subtly, under the guise of caring for a poor, sick mother. But I had a secret weapon, an old digital recorder the size of a lighter, with amazingly clear sound. Once it had helped me solve crimes. Now it would help me defend myself from my own son. I carried it everywhere, especially to every meeting with Igor or his emissaries. Soon my patience was rewarded. One evening, as I was returning from work, Igor was waiting in the entrance hall, alone, without Violetta. That already worried me. They usually acted as a pair. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, stepping toward me. I discreetly switched on the recorder in my pocket. "Let's go upstairs," I suggested. "It's cold outside." "No, here's fine. It won't take long." We sat on a bench near the entrance. Faint light filtered through the bare branches. Distant city sounds carried, cars, music, snatches of voices. "Mom, I came to offer you a deal," Igor began, lowering his voice. "Simple, human. You voluntarily agree to move to a care home and transfer the apartment to me. In return, I guarantee you comfortable conditions, regular visits, and let's say, a monthly allowance for personal expenses. And if I refuse?" I asked, squeezing the recorder in my pocket. Igor sighed. His face hardened, turned cold and unfamiliar. "Then it'll be worse, Mom. Much worse. I have neighbors' testimony about your strange behavior. I have a doctor's statement about early dementia." "What doctor?" I interrupted. "That quack you and Violetta dragged into my home, who didn't even examine me." "Doesn't matter." He waved it off. "What matters is the court will side with me. And then you'll end up in a state psychiatric institution, not a comfortable private home. Is that what you want?" "You're threatening me, Igor." I looked straight into his eyes. For a second he faltered, as though he'd seen something unexpected there. "You're threatening your own mother?" "I'm just explaining the situation," he muttered, looking away. "Then my choice is clear," I said firmly. "I'll fight for my home and my dignity. And I truly hope you come to your senses, son. If not, you'll have only yourself to blame." He jumped up abruptly. "You'll regret not taking my offer." When he left, I switched off the recorder and exhaled with relief. The recording was clean, every word was audible. My first piece of evidence, proof of my son's malicious intent. But it was only the beginning. Over the next 2 weeks, I collected an entire set of recordings. A conversation with Violetta, who pretended to reconcile but really wanted to know where I kept the apartment documents. A talk with a social worker, Violetta's friend, who tried to catch me in a messy apartment to file a report about unfit living conditions. A phone call with Igor, in which he carelessly admitted his plan to sell the apartment right after the trial. I gave all of this to Mikhail, who methodically built our defense. "You haven't lost your touch, Tamara Nikolaevna," he nodded approvingly. "That's the prosecutor's school showing. Good work." But then came what I had feared most. Igor arrived, with a district police officer and 2 orderlies from a psychiatric hospital. They intended to take me away for a forced examination, without my consent. "We have a referral from a psychiatrist," the policeman explained nervously, avoiding my eyes. "Complaints of inappropriate behavior." "Threats? Threats? To whom?" I demanded. "You threatened your son, my neighbor, Klavdia Stepanovna," chimed in from the landing, where she had clearly been eavesdropping with unhealthy curiosity. "We all heard you shouting that you'd kill him if he entered your apartment." A blatant lie. I had never threatened Igor, certainly not with physical harm. But it was her word against mine. Who would they believe? "I'm not going anywhere," I said firmly, clutching the doorframe. "You have no legal grounds to take me without my consent. If you're a danger to yourself, or others, we do," the officer explained nervously, glancing at the orderlies. 2 strong men with stone faces. "Please don't resist. It won't take long, just an examination." I saw one of the orderlies step toward me. Another second and they would grab me, twist my arms, drag me away. And then I really might end up in a psychiatric hospital, where getting out is nearly impossible, especially when your own son is working to keep you there. In that critical moment, instincts and long-forgotten skills kicked in. I retreated deeper into the apartment, slammed the door in the stunned officer's face, and locked all the bolts. Then I rushed to the phone and dialed Mikhail's number. "They came for me," I said quickly, hearing them start banging on the door. "The district police officer. The orderlies want to take me to a psychiatric hospital." "Don't open." Mikhail's voice carried a note of insistence, of alarm. "I'm already on my way and calling the police." This is illegal entry into a residence. They say they have a referral. I tried to speak calmly, though my heart was pounding wildly. A referral is not an arrest warrant, Mikhail snapped. Without a court decision, they have no right to take you by force. Hold on for 15 minutes. Okay. The knocking on the door grew louder, more insistent. I heard the district police officer threaten to break it down if I didn't open voluntarily. On the stairwell, frightened cries of neighbors rose. Then I heard Igor's harsh voice. I told you she's crazy. Call the emergency services. Let them break in. At that moment, I realized it was time to use my last resort, a measure I hadn't wanted to resort to until the very last minute. I pulled my old Nokia phone from the pocket of my robe, a gift from Igor on my last birthday, so I'd always stay connected. I barely used it, preferring the landline. It had only a few numbers stored, and now I dialed one of them, praying to all the saints that it hadn't changed over the years. On the third ring, someone picked up. Hello? A surprised male voice. Semyon? I asked, and my own voice sounded strange to me. A pause. A long, tense pause, during which I heard nothing but the pounding on the door and my own heartbeat. Tamara, he finally said so quietly I barely caught it. Tamara Nikolaevna. My God, is it really you? Yes, I exhaled desperately. I need help, Semyon. Urgent help. What happened? His voice instantly grew focused, professional, just the way I remembered from those long ago times when we worked together. I quickly outlined the situation. With each of my words, his breathing grew heavier. Address, he said sharply when I finished. Tell me your address, Tamara. I dictated it. He repeated it to be sure. Don't open the door to anyone, he ordered. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Hold on, Tamara. He hesitated for a second. Don't be afraid. I won't let them hurt you. Hanging up, I leaned against the wall and closed my eyes. So many years had passed, and he was still the same, ready to rush to my aid at the first sign I called. Suddenly, the pounding on the door stopped. I heard loud voices in the stairwell, someone shouting indignantly, then sudden silence. And then, after a few minutes, a gentle ring at the door. No pounding, no threats, just a polite, restrained ring. From behind the door came Mikhail's voice. It's me. You can open. Everything's fine. Cautiously, I approached the door and looked through the peephole. Mikhail stood there, and beside him, a tall, gray-haired man in an elegant coat, cane in hand. Semyon Arkadyevich. 30 years later. My hands trembled as I opened the door. Good evening, Tamara Nikolaevna. He slightly inclined his head in greeting, as if we had seen each other only yesterday, not after 3 decades apart. I'm glad to see you again, though the circumstances, of course, are not the best. Semyon Arkadyevich, my voice quivered. Thank you for coming. How could I not? He smiled faintly, the corners of his eyes wrinkling. You know, I've always been your loyal comrade. And in his eyes, I read the unspoken words, a true friend, steadfast, faithful. Where are they? I asked, glancing at the stairwell. The orderlies have left, he replied calmly. I explained to them that their actions were illegal and could carry serious consequences, including criminal liability for attempted unlawful deprivation of freedom. And Igor, your son, his gaze hardened. He left too. But I'm afraid he won't stop. We must be ready for new attempts. Despite the seriousness of the situation, we smiled. Of course, he said, lightly touching my hand. You didn't think I'd leave you alone like this. Moreover, I'm the judge in your case, and I must remain as objective as possible. He winked, and I saw in his eyes that mischievous sparkle I once loved. Thank you, was all I could say. But we need to talk, Tamara, about many things. About the past, about why you disappeared back then, and about what's happening now. I nodded, letting them in, closing the door to block out curious neighbors. It was time to lay all the cards on the table, time to remember the other Tamara Nikolaevna. Strong, determined, unafraid of hardship, the woman who once had to fight her own son in court. The woman the judge recognized instantly, despite 30 years apart, exclaiming, "It's her." Ahead was a trial, and I knew it would be my last battle. A fight for justice, dignity, and the right to live as I chose. And this time, I finally had allies. We sat in the kitchen as if in another life. Back then, it had been a tiny kitchen in my service apartment, where Semyon and I stayed up late discussing case files. Now, it was a spacious dining kitchen, with a high ceiling and an old sideboard inherited from my parents. Semyon sat across from me, his cane resting on his lap. He had hardly changed. The same attentive gray eyes, the same straight posture, the same resolute jawline. Only his hair had gone gray, and wrinkles lined his face. But he still carried that masculine charm that only deepens with age. Sensing we needed privacy, Mikhail tactfully excused himself, promising to check in the morning. Semyon sipped tea from an old porcelain cup with a golden rim. 30 years, Tamara. 30 years you've been hiding in plain sight. Why? I sighed. That's a complicated question. There isn't a simple answer. Do you remember the chicken case? I asked instead. Of course, he nodded. One of the biggest cases of the 90s, a gang that kept the whole city in fear. You brilliantly brought the case to court despite threats and pressure. And remember what happened after? His face darkened. Your husband, found in his own car, a bullet in the head. Official version, suicide due to debts. But we all knew it was revenge. Revenge on you through the closest person. Yes. I gripped my cup so tightly my knuckles turned white. Andre wasn't a perfect husband. We had our struggles. But he didn't deserve to die like that. And Igor was only 5 then. He lost his father. And you got scared, Semyon said quietly. You feared they would reach. Your son too. Not only that, I shook my head. After Andre's death, I conducted my own investigation, unofficially, and I learned the gang leader had powerful protectors, very high up. Even in prison, he could order hits on anyone. And so you decided to disappear, Semyon guessed. Yes, I changed my name, went back to my maiden one, moved to another district, took a job where no one would ever look for a former prosecutor's investigator. I gave a bitter smile. A school janitor, the perfect disguise. No one notices janitors. People look past them as if they're furniture. And your son? Semyon frowned. He should have known who you were. No, I shook my head. Igor was too young. He barely remembered his father. And about my job, I told him I worked as a secretary in some office. He was ashamed that his mother was just a janitor. He never wanted to know more, never asked about the past. So all these years you lived a double life, Semyon said thoughtfully. Hiding your true self even from your own son. I was protecting him, I protested. The less he knew, the safer he was. At least that's what I thought then. And now? Semyon studied me intently. Now? I sighed. Now I'm not sure I did the right thing. Maybe if Igor had known who I really was, he would have treated me differently, with more respect. Maybe he wouldn't see me as a burden. Don't blame yourself, Semyon said gently, touching my hand. You did what you thought was right. You protected your son the best you could, and raised a man who's ready to throw his own mother out for money, I said bitterly. That's not on you, Semyon said firmly. Everyone chooses their own path. You gave him everything you could. Love, upbringing, a roof over his head. The rest was his choice. We fell silent. Outside it was already dark. The kitchen glowed warmly in the yellow light of the old wall lamp. In the distance, the usual sounds of the city drifted. Cars honking, someone yelling. But here, it felt as if time had stopped, as if those 30 years of separation had never been. You know, Semyon said at last, staring into space. I searched for you. After you disappeared, I called hospitals, morgues, visited your relatives' addresses. I even hired a private detective. Really? I looked at him in surprise. Yes, he smiled sadly. But you covered your tracks well, professionally. No leads, no traces. As if prosecutor's investigator Tamara Nikolaevna had simply vanished. I'm sorry, I whispered. Sorry I couldn't explain, couldn't say goodbye. I understand, he nodded. You were afraid they'd reach, me too. And you were probably right. That gang wasn't the forgiving kind. No, they weren't, I agreed. But now it doesn't matter. Why not? Semyon raised a questioning brow. Because the gang leader is dead. I shrugged. I followed the news. He was killed in prison 5 years ago. Some inmate brawl. And yet you still kept hiding? He asked, surprised. Out of habit, I smiled faintly. And besides, he still had followers. By then, Igor was grown, had his own family. Why drag up the past? I'd gotten used to my new life. It was quiet. Until your son decided to take your apartment, Semyon muttered. Yes, I sighed. That was the last straw. I could endure his indifference, his rare visits, even his wife wrinkling her nose at the smell of bleach she thought clung to me. But to strip me of my home, to send me to a nursing home, no, I couldn't accept that. And rightly so, Semyon said firmly, tapping his cane on the floor. No one has the right to control your life, not even your own son. But now the question is, what do we do next? I asked. The trial is scheduled for next week, and you're the judge on my case. That's awkward, to say the least. Yes, he nodded thoughtfully. I'll have to recuse myself. But before I do, he leaned closer across the table. Tamara, we have a chance not only to win this case, but to teach your son a lesson he'll never forget. What do you mean? I asked warily. I won't announce my recusal until the very last moment. His eyes gleamed with mischief. Let Igor and his lawyers prepare, thinking I'll be the judge. And then, right there in court, I'll declare my recusal and transfer the case to another judge, but that will only buy time. I objected. Igor will just adapt and keep pressing. Not just any judge, Semyon squinted slyly. To Larisa Dmitrievna, I couldn't help but smile, remembering the nickname our generation had given her. The Rock, the strictest and most principled judge in the city. She's still on the bench? I asked. Oh yes, Semyon nodded, and yet she was just as unyielding when it came to justice. Besides, she didn't much like it when children tried to take advantage of their elderly parents. Her relationship with her mother had been complicated, but when her mother fell ill, Larissa took her in and cared for her until her last day. And you think she'll take my side? I asked doubtfully. She will stand on the side of the law, Semyon answered with confidence. And the law, in this case, is entirely on your side. Do you have medical reports confirming your capacity? Do you have recordings of conversations with your son where he admits to acting out of selfish motives? Witnesses to the recent incident with the unlawful attempt at hospitalization. But Igor has witnesses too, I reminded him. Neighbors willing to confirm my strange behavior, the local policeman who filed a report, that phony psychiatrist with his conclusion. All of that could come up in court. Semyon waved his hand dismissively. Especially if you appear not as a frightened old woman, but as a former prosecutor's investigator with an impeccable reputation. I gasped. You're suggesting I reveal my past publicly? Exactly, he nodded. Imagine your son's face when he learns that his fragile mother once put the city's most dangerous criminals behind bars. That she was a legend in the prosecutor's office, still remembered and respected in legal circles. I thought about it. The idea was tempting, and at the same time frightening. For 30 years, I had hidden my true identity. For 30 years, I had lived under the mask of a humble cleaning lady. Take off that mask. Return to your true self. But what if some of those criminals still have followers? I voiced my concern. What if they want to finish what their boss didn't? Tamara, Semyon took my hand. It's been 30 years. Most of that gang are either dead or serving life sentences. And those who remain, they are old men now, like us. They've long forgotten old grudges. Maybe you're right, I said hesitantly. But it's still a huge risk. A bigger risk, Semyon countered softly, is to lose your home and your dignity. He squeezed my hand lightly. This time you're not alone. You have me and Mikhail. And I'm certain there are others who remember you and would want to help. I looked at our joined hands, his, large, veined, with age spots, mine, roughened from work, with knobby joints, hands that had lived, hands that still had things to say and do. All right, I nodded decisively. Let's take the risk. After all, I have nothing left to lose. Except your chains, I added with a smirk, remembering an old slogan. That's the spirit. Semyon's face lit up. That's the Tamara Nikolaevna I knew, fearless and determined. Don't exaggerate, I muttered, embarrassed. I'm just an old woman, tired of hiding and pretending. You'll never be just an old woman, Semyon said seriously. To me, you'll always be that bright young girl who burst into the prosecutor's office like a whirlwind and turned everything upside down. He paused, softer, including my heart. I felt my cheeks flush. My God, blushing like a girl at my age. Semyon Arkadievich, I stammered. Don't say nonsense. It's not nonsense, he smiled. I never stopped thinking about you. Even when you married, even when you divorced, deep inside I always held a quiet hope you'd come back one day. And here I am, I said with a sad smile. An old woman with a grown son who wants to put me in a psychiatric hospital. You came back, he said simply. That's what matters. We'll handle the rest. His voice carried such confidence that I couldn't help but believe. Maybe it wasn't too late. Too late to change everything? To start a new life, not in a nursing home, but here, in my own house, with my own rules, and maybe not in loneliness. We talked late into the night, making plans. Semyon would discreetly contact Larissa Dmitrievna and prepare the ground for her to take the case. I would gather evidence and prepare myself mentally to reveal my past publicly. Mikhail, our loyal comrade, would handle the legal side. When Semyon left, it was well past midnight. He held my hand a little longer than politeness required. "Take care of yourself, Tamara," he said, suddenly switching to informal speech. "And don't be afraid. The truth is on your side." "Thank you, Semyon." I smiled despite everything. After he left, I sat in the kitchen for a long time, staring into the dark window. For 30 years, I had grown so used to my role that I had almost become it. A quiet, invisible woman no one would remember when she was gone. An ant in the human anthill. But now the time had come to be myself again. Tamara Nikolaevna, prosecutor's investigator, scourge of the underworld. A woman whose name made hardened bandits pale. A woman still remembered and respected. A woman my son would never know. I pulled from the closet an old framed photograph, the only one I had kept in sight. It was me and Igor. He was very small, about 5 years old, sitting on my lap, laughing toothlessly at the camera. And I, a young woman with a determined look, holding him as if to shield him from the whole world. "What happened to us, my boy?" I whispered, running my finger over the smiling child's face. "When did you stop being my little boy and become a stranger?" I didn't know the answer, but I knew one thing: I would not give up without a fight, not just for my apartment or my dignity, but for that boy in the photograph who still existed somewhere deep inside the calculating adult man, the boy who might still be capable of understanding what it meant to love and be loved. The trial was in 5 days, 5 days to prepare for battle, 5 days to recall everything I had learned in the prosecutor's office, 5 days to transform from victim to fighter. And when I entered the courtroom, my son's eyes would widen in shock. But the real blow would come when the judge rose and exclaimed, "It's her!" And then silence, because no one had ever guessed who I really was. No one except Semyon Arkadyevich, who had kept my secret for 30 years. The following days turned into a true marathon. I never thought, at 58, I could mobilize myself as if it were still the fiery 90s when we worked around the clock, forgetting sleep and food. Mikhail helped me file a police report about the attempted unlawful hospitalization. The district policeman who had tried to drag me into the psychiatric hospital was reprimanded, and the orderlies were threatened with losing their licenses. They quickly backed down and signed a statement admitting they had acted on my son's instructions without properly verifying his documents. A strong trump card in court, Mikhail nodded with satisfaction as he read the papers. An attempt to restrict freedom without legal grounds, a serious violation. "Do you think they'll admit their guilt?" I asked doubtfully. "They won't withdraw their statements at the last moment." "They wouldn't dare," the lawyer smirked. Meanwhile, Semyon personally spoke with the chief physician of the psychiatric hospital. An internal investigation had already begun. No one wanted legal trouble because of my son. I sighed. It was strange to hear my son spoken of with such disdain. To me, Igor, despite everything, was still the child I had carried in my womb, nursed and raised alone. My flesh and blood. How had it come to this, that we had become enemies? "Don't blame yourself, Tamara Nikolaevna," Mikhail said quietly, as if reading my thoughts. "You did everything for your son. You gave him an education, raised him to be a decent man. His choices now, they're his responsibility, not yours." "I know," I shook my head. "But I still feel guilty. Maybe if I had been home more often, not working triple shifts at the factory." "You worked to give him a decent life," Mikhail reminded me. "Many single mothers live like that, and not all children grow up ungrateful." There was truth in his words, but it was easier not to admit it. Somewhere I had made a mistake. Somewhere I had missed the moment when my kind, sensitive boy turned into a calculating cynic. 2 days before the trial, Semyon invited me to a small cafe on the city's outskirts, a cozy place with home-style food and few visitors, the perfect spot for a private conversation. "I spoke with Larissa Dmitrievna," he said, breaking a crusty roll. "She knows the situation and is ready to take the case after my recusal." "And what did she say?" I asked anxiously. "She said sons like yours deserve to be disinherited," Semyon chuckled. "But as a judge, of course, she'll be objective. She'll only look at the facts." "The facts are on my side?" I asked doubtfully. Without a doubt, he nodded firmly. We have medical conclusions proving your competence. We have recordings where Igor admits his selfish motives. We have the orderly's testimony about the unlawful hospitalization attempt. And what about that psychiatrist Igor brought? I recalled the man with shifty eyes who had so confidently diagnosed me without even examining me. Ah, now that's interesting. Semyon leaned closer. Mikhail dug into him. His name is Dr. Zyman. He's a non-practicing doctor, works in a private commission where you can buy any kind of certificate for money. A few years ago, he was caught falsifying medical documents, only got a fine. His conclusions aren't worth anything. The weight pressing on my chest lifted a little. Exactly. Semyon nodded with satisfaction. Mikhail has already prepared a motion for an independent examination, should the other side insist on using his diagnosis. But I think they'll abandon that witness once they learn about his reputation. We went over our defense strategy, considering all scenarios. Semyon was confident of victory, but doubt still gnawed at me, not because I didn't trust the law, but because I knew my son. Stubborn, resourceful, he wouldn't give up easily. What if he came up with something else? I voiced my fears. Igor is not the kind to admit defeat lightly. Whatever he tries, we'll be ready, Semyon said, covering my hand with his. I won't let anyone hurt you, Tamara. Not now, not ever. The tenderness and determination in his eyes made me believe. Maybe this time things would really end well. But fate, as always, had its own plan. That very evening when I returned home, I found my apartment door broken, not opened with a master key or duplicate, but truly broken, with the lock smashed and wood splinters on the floor. My heart sank into my stomach. My first thought was, burglars, but instantly I knew, no, not burglars. Igor, only he knew what to look for and where. I entered cautiously, bracing for the worst. The place was ransacked. Cabinets emptied, couch cushions slashed, books tossed to the floor. Someone had methodically turned the place upside down, searching for something. My eyes were drawn to the mezzanine in the hallway. Its doors stood wide open, and an old stepladder lay nearby. The Yugoslavian boot box where I had kept my old belongings lay on the floor, empty. They had found my hiding place and taken it. My diary, photographs, documents. Everything that testified to my past life. Everything except the papers I had wisely stored in the bank's safe deposit box. The worst was in the bedroom. There, they hadn't just searched, they had destroyed. Childhood photos of Igor, which had stood on the dresser, were smashed, glass trampled underfoot. Letters I had kept in an old box were torn into tiny scraps. Even the bed linens were ripped in several places, as if they'd been checking for a hiding spot. I sank down onto the edge of the ruined bed, my legs trembling. Who had done this? Igor? Unlikely. It wasn't in his nature to dirty his hands. More likely he'd hired someone. Maybe those same orderlies who had tried to drag me into the psychiatric hospital. Or perhaps Violetta's friends. As far as I knew, she had acquaintances in not the most respectable circles. My first impulse was to call the police. But what would I say? That I suspected my own son of organizing a break-in without any evidence? That would look like paranoia. That's exactly what they're trying to accuse me of. I took out my phone and dialed Semyon's number. He answered after the first ring, as if he'd been waiting for my call. Tamara, what happened? Someone broke into my apartment. I tried to speak calmly, but my voice still trembled. Everything's turned upside down. They were looking for my old documents, photographs, anything that could confirm my past. I'm coming right away. His voice carried alarm. Don't go anywhere and don't touch anything. And call the police. This is no joke anymore. This is a criminal offense. Do you think it was Igor? I asked bluntly. Silence. I don't know, Semyon finally answered. But I'll find out. Wait for me, I'll be there in 20 minutes. He arrived even faster, out of breath, his eyes full of worry. The police arrived right after him. Two young sergeants, who treated Mr. Judge with respect, were very polite and carefully inspected the apartment, writing down all the damage. We'll be opening a criminal case, one of them said. Burglary, home invasion, property damage. Can you say what exactly is missing? I hesitated. I couldn't admit that the evidence of my past life had disappeared, a life no one had known about for 30 years as a prosecutor's investigator. Semyon stepped in, old photographs, letters, documents. Nothing valuable from a material standpoint, but very dear personally to Tamara Nikolaevna. The sergeants exchanged glances. Looks like a targeted search, the older one remarked. Ordinary thieves don't work like this. They grab equipment, money, valuables, and disappear quickly. Here, everything was gone through methodically. Do you have any suspicion of who could have done this? The second policeman asked, looking at me. I hesitated again, but Semyon firmly nodded. Tamara Nikolaevna has a son, Igor Andreevich. They have a court hearing in 2 days. He filed a lawsuit to declare his mother incompetent in order to gain control over her property. The sergeants exchanged another look, but this time with understanding. This happens a lot, the older one sighed. Relatives dividing property without waiting. He stopped, realizing the tactlessness of what he'd said. In any case, we'll check him as well. Give us his address. I dictated Igor's address. I felt like a traitor, reporting my own son, but I had no choice. He was the one who had declared war, crossing the line of what was acceptable. When the police left, promising to keep us updated on the investigation, I was left alone in the wreckage of my apartment. What now? Exhausted, I sank onto the sofa, not even bothering to gather the scattered things. If they had taken all the evidence of my past, they hadn't taken everything. Semyon sat down next to me. What do you mean? You, he said simply. You are living proof. You remember all the details, the cases you worked on. You remember the people, the events, the dates. That can't be taken away from you, but without documentary proof. Tamara, he gently placed his hand on my shoulder. You forget that I'm also a witness to your past. And not just me. Larisa Dmitrievna remembers you. So does Mikhail. And in the end, the prosecutor's office archives still exist. The cases you worked on are kept there. Your signature is on every page. He was right. I had panicked and missed the obvious. Even if Igor and his accomplices destroyed all my personal documents, they couldn't erase 30 years of history or the memories of the people I had worked with. You're right, I exhaled. I felt the panic retreat. Thank you for reminding me. Always, he smiled. Now let's put this place back in order. You can't let your son think this broke you. We worked late into the night, restoring some semblance of normality to the apartment. Semyon turned out to be surprisingly handy, hammering nails, fixing cupboard doors, even repairing the broken bathroom door. I busied myself with clothes, dishes, books, everything scattered across the floor. By midnight, the apartment looked somewhat livable again, though far from cozy. We sat in the kitchen, drinking tea in silence, each lost in thought. I'm afraid, Semyon, I finally confessed. Not for myself, but for Igor. He crossed the line. Breaking in, stealing, destroying property, that's a criminal offense. You still love him, Semyon said. It wasn't a question, but a statement. Of course. I shrugged. He's my son. I carried him under my heart. I saw his first smile, heard his first word. How could I not love him? And yet you'll defend yourself against him in court. Yes, I said firmly, because sometimes love isn't indulgence. It's strength. When we follow our loved ones into their wrongful desires, we don't help them. We harm them. Semyon studied me thoughtfully over his teacup. You know, I often wondered who you would have become if you'd lived those 30 years differently. Not hiding, not giving up your career. And who do you think I would have been? I smiled despite myself. At the very least, a regional prosecutor, he answered seriously. Or a Supreme Court judge, or a lawyer with a world-class reputation. You always had more potential than me, or anyone else from our graduating class. You flatter me. I waved him off, though deep down I was pleased. But what's the point of thinking about what didn't happen? Back then, I made my choice and lived as I thought best. Do you regret it? He asked. I thought for a long time. Did I regret the missed opportunities, the career that never happened, the recognition I never received? No, I finally said. I don't regret it. I saved my son from danger. I protected him the best I could. If he grew up ungrateful, that's not my fault. I did everything I had to do as a mother. Semyon nodded, as if he hadn't expected any other answer. Now you must do everything you have to do as a person, he said. Defend yourself and your dignity. And maybe teach your son a lesson he'll never forget. What lesson? I asked. That you can't betray your loved ones without consequences. Even if those loved ones seem weak and defenseless, there was bitter truth in his words. Igor had to realize that his actions carried consequences, that it was unacceptable to treat his mother as an enemy to be disposed of at the first opportunity. Will you stay the night? Semyon asked, getting up. I can make up the sofa. I don't want to leave you alone after everything that happened. I wanted to argue, to say I could manage on my own. But suddenly I realized I truly was afraid of being left alone. Afraid of the creaks in the empty apartment, the rustle of shadows. Afraid that Igor or his accomplices might return while I slept. Yes, please stay, I said quietly. If it's not too much trouble. Not at all, he smiled so tenderly that my heart ached. I'll be here, Tamara. Always. We made up the sofa for him. I gave him one of Andre's old pajamas that had miraculously survived the ransacking untouched. They were a bit big, but Semyon was larger than my late husband anyway. As I drifted off in my bed, I thought of the upcoming trial, of how it would be to enter the courtroom and see my son's face, how he would react when he learned the truth about my past, whether we could ever mend our relationship after all this. And I thought of Semyon, sleeping in the next room, the man who had carried me in his heart for 30 years and had come to my aid the moment I called. The man who might become something more than just an old friend. These thoughts lulled me into sleep. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel alone. I felt like I had an ally, someone ready to stand by me and face all trials together. In the morning, we expected a call from the police with news that would change all our plans. The phone rang early. I struggled to open my eyes, squinting at the clock. 6:30. Who could be calling so early? Hello? I croaked, pressing the phone to my ear. Tamara Nikolaevna, Senior Lieutenant Sergeyev, a cheerful male voice said. We came yesterday about the break-in. Yes, I remember. I sat up in bed, finally awake. Did something happen? You could say that. There was an odd excitement in his tone. We've detained a suspect. But here's the thing. It's not your son. Who is it? My heart started pounding faster. A man named Kornev Leonid Petrovich. The officer rustled papers. 58 years old, previously convicted under Article 158, theft. Released 3 years ago. I froze. Leonid Kornev, one of the old henchmen of the chicken, a small fry but a loyal dog to his master. It was he who once threatened to kill me in the courtroom when the sentence was read. How? How do you know it was him? I asked with difficulty. He turned himself in, the officer replied with a hint of bewilderment. Came to the station early in the morning, drunk, shouting that he'd found her, that he'd found the very investigator who put the chicken behind bars. Claims he tracked you down by chance, saw you on the street, recognized you, and followed you home. Says he's dreamed of revenge for 30 years. I couldn't breathe. So Igor had nothing to do with it. He hadn't trashed my apartment, hadn't been looking for my documents. It was a terrible, incredible coincidence. A ghost from the past, choosing this exact moment to return to my life. Did he confess to the break-in? Yes, to everything, the officer confirmed. And to stealing your documents. Says he wanted proof that you were that investigator. And the documents, he claims he burned them. I closed my eyes. The irony of fate. All those years hiding my past, keeping it secret, only to lose every shred of proof at the very moment it was needed. Thank you for letting me know, I said. What will happen to him now? Given his record and the circumstances, he's facing 3 to 5 years, the officer replied businesslike. You'll need to come in to give testimony, but there's no rush. Within a week, I thanked him and hung up, feeling strangely empty. For so many years, I had feared the ghosts of my past, and here one had materialized, confirming that my fears hadn't been baseless. What is it? Semyon sat down on the edge of the bed, his eyes full of concern. I told him about the call, about Kornev, about the burned documents. He listened, frowning more and more. Incredible coincidence, he muttered when I finished. And just now, when we needed those documents for court. Do you really think it's coincidence? I looked at him closely. What if Igor had some connection to Kornev? What if he found out about my past and used the chicken's old contacts? Impossible, Semyon shook his head firmly. Your son was just a child when you worked on that case. He couldn't know about it. And even if he somehow did, it's unlikely a school physics teacher would have connections in the criminal underworld. He was right, of course. I was searching for a complicated explanation where everything was simple. An old criminal, holding a grudge, happened to stumble upon the person he blamed for his misfortunes and decided to take revenge. A banal story, one of thousands. And now what? I threw up my hands helplessly. Without documents, without photos, how will I prove who I was? As I told you yesterday, Semyon said, encouragingly squeezing my hand. You are the living proof yourself. And there are the prosecutor's archives, and there I am, after all. Honestly, as a federal judge, what do you mean you can't find it? I gave a faint smile. He always knew how to lift my spirits, even in the most desperate situations. Thank you. I shook his hand. I don't know what I would do without you. Luckily, you won't have to, he said seriously. I'm here, Tamara, and I'll be here as long as you allow me. Will you let me? There was something shining in his eyes, and I felt my breath catch. Could this really be possible at our age, after so many years apart? But there was no time for romantic thoughts. The day of the trial was approaching, and we had to prepare. Semyon went home to change and deal with some work matters, and I began to tidy up after yesterday's mess. Toward evening, Mikhail arrived with news. He had also heard of Kornev's arrest and considered it a stroke of luck. At least now your son doesn't have a trump card in the form of a capricious mother wrecking her own apartment. The lawyer smirked. Otherwise, I wouldn't be surprised if he tried to use yesterday's mess as proof of your insanity. You think he's capable of that? I asked bitterly. Judging by what I know of him, quite, Mikhail shrugged. But this time, it won't fly. We have the official police report of the break-in and the criminal's testimony. We went over all the details of the upcoming hearing once again. The strategy remained the same. I had to appear not as a helpless old woman, but as a former prosecutor's investigator, a woman with an impeccable reputation and a sharp mind. Wait before you speak. Be confident. Speak clearly. Look straight ahead, Mikhail instructed. Show that you are fully in control of your life and the situation. And if Igor starts recalling my lapses of memory or odd behavior, I doubt it aloud. Answer calmly and with dignity, the lawyer advised. For example, if he says you forgot to turn off the water, reply that you were engrossed in a good book. If he accuses you of sloppiness, say that everyone has their own idea of order, and you have the right to live as you wish. The key is, do not justify yourself and do not apologize. You've done nothing wrong. I nodded, mentally preparing for a verbal duel with my own son. How would it come to this? At what point does someone you love turn into a stranger, an enemy? That evening, Semyon returned again, with food, a bottle of good wine, and tools to finally fix the broken door. He insisted on staying overnight again. For your peace of mind, as he put it. But I felt it wasn't only about that. He liked being near, caring, feeling needed. And I must admit, I liked his presence too. Reliable, calm, comforting. We had dinner by candlelight. Suddenly, the electricity went out in the whole district. A typical occurrence for our old building with its worn wiring. In the flickering light, his face seemed younger, the gray in his hair less noticeable. You know, he said, pouring wine into glasses, I've been thinking about what happens after the trial. And I accepted my glass. For a moment, our fingers touched. No matter what happens, you can't stay here alone. I'm serious. If we win, and I'm sure we will, Igor won't take defeat lightly. He may try something else. And what do you propose? I sipped the wine, feeling its warmth spread inside me. Move in with me, Semyon said simply. I have a big apartment, plenty of space. You'll live there until things settle down. I looked at him in surprise. You're asking me to move in with you? In what capacity? As a friend, for starters. He smiled. And later? We'll see. 30 years is a long time, Tamra. We need to get to know each other again. There was something in his words, wisdom that only comes with age. Don't rush. Don't force feelings. Let life flow naturally. I'll think about it, I promised. After the trial. Agreed? He raised his glass. To justice. To justice, I echoed, and our glasses chimed softly. The judgment day came suddenly, as if I blinked and it was here. I woke before the alarm, heart pounding, knowing today my fate would be decided. Semyon had left before dawn to prepare for the hearing and talk with Judge Larisa Dmitrievna. I was alone, yet strangely, I felt no fear, no anxiety, only resolve, cold, steady resolve, the kind of determination of someone ready to fight for her life. I put on that anthracite-colored suit I had pulled from its hiding place a week ago, tied my hair in a strict bun, added light lipstick, and looked in the mirror. I almost didn't recognize the reflection. A weary cleaner with tired eyes stared back, but inside stood a strong, confident woman. Tamara Nikolaevna, prosecutor's investigator. The storm of the criminal underworld of the 1990s. At 9 sharp, Mikhail arrived for me. He nodded approvingly at my appearance. You look excellent, Tamara Nikolaevna. Confident, elegant, tasteful. Exactly how a woman of your stature should appear in court. We arrived at the courthouse 20 minutes before the hearing. A crowd had already gathered. Neighbors, the local policeman, even the school principal where I used to work. News of the unusual case had spread across town, and everyone wanted to see the mother whom her own son was trying to commit to a psychiatric ward. In the corridor, I saw Igor and Violetta talking tensely by the window. My son was pale, dark circles under his eyes. Clearly, he hadn't slept, preparing for court. Violetta, by contrast, looked sharp and resolute, like a general before battle. When they noticed me, Igor froze for a moment. His eyes widened in shock. He clearly hadn't expected to see his mother like this. Well-groomed, elegant, back straight, head held high. For a second, something like respect flickered in his gaze, but it quickly shifted back to irritation. Mom, he stepped toward me. We need to talk alone. I'm afraid it's too late for that, Igor, I answered calmly. Whatever you want to say, you can say in court. Mother, listen, there was a condescending note in his voice. I know you're upset, but we only want what's best for you. That nursing home. Spare me the details. I raised my hand to stop him. I know all about your plans to sell my apartment as soon as you gained control of my finances. Igor went even paler. Who told you? That judge. He has no right to interfere. That's corruption. You told me yourself, I smiled. In a phone call with Violetta, I recorded it, as well as how you plan to forge my signature on documents, bribe neighbors for false testimony, and enlist a psychiatrist to declare me insane. Igor's face twisted with rage. You spied on me? Recorded my conversations? You really are insane. No, son, I shook my head. I'm not insane. I'm an investigator, a former prosecutor's investigator to be precise. I simply collected evidence the way I was trained. He stared at me like I was a ghost, eyes full of despair, shock, disbelief. What nonsense is this? You've been a cleaner your whole life. What investigator? You'll learn all about that in court. I glanced at the clock. 5 minutes to the hearing. Let's not be late. I turned and walked toward the courtroom, feeling his eyes on my back. Confusion, anger, incomprehension. I pitied him. Pitied that he had never known the truth. Pitied that instead of pride for his mother, he had felt only shame. And pitied myself, a woman who lived 30 years hiding her real identity, even from her son. In the courtroom, the benches were full. I sat beside Mikhail at the defense table. Across from us sat Igor with his ambitious young lawyer, while Violetta perched directly behind her husband in the first row. The secretary called the session to order. All rise. The court is now in session. Judge Semyon Arkadyevich entered, his face unreadable. He sat down, looked around the hall, and for a brief moment his gaze lingered on me, but his expression did not flicker. A true professional. This court will hear the case of citizen Igor Andreev petitioning to declare citizen Tamara Nikolaevna legally incompetent, he read in a flat, formal tone. Then he paused, removed his glasses, and looked straight at me. Before we begin, I must make a statement, he said. In accordance with Article 16 of the Civil Procedure Code of the Russian Federation, I recuse myself from this case, as I am personally acquainted with the defendant. A wave of whispers rolled through the courtroom. Igor straightened, a hopeful smile flashing across his face. He clearly thought this was to his advantage. But furthermore, Semyon continued firmly, I find it necessary to inform the court that the defendant, Tamara Nikolaevna, served as a regional investigator for the prosecutor's office from 1987 to 1996 and was one of the finest officers of law enforcement. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. People turned, staring at me with disbelief. Yes, Semyon Arkadyevich exclaimed, rising to his feet. This is the same Tamara Nikolaevna who solved the Chick case, who put away the most dangerous gangsters, who was awarded the Medal of Distinction in military merit. A heavy silence fell. You could hear the ticking of the wall clock, the hum of ventilation, the creak of a chair. Every eye was on me, shocked, astonished, incredulous. Slowly I rose, squared my shoulders, lifted my head, and looked straight into the eyes of my son, frozen in his seat. Yes, I said loudly and clearly. I am Tamara Nikolaevna, former prosecutor's investigator, and I am ready to prove my competence by every lawful means. At that moment, the doors burst open. A tall, stern woman in a judge's robe entered, silver-haired, sharp-eyed. Larisa Dmitrievna, Stone Larisa as we used to call her. Apologies for being late, she said, moving to the bench. I will be presiding after Judge Arkadyevich's recusal. Semyon nodded, stepped aside, and before taking his seat among the spectators, gave me a quick glance and the faintest wink. Everything was going according to plan, but the true test was still ahead. I not only had to prove my competence, I had to face my son, who had just learned his entire life had been built on a lie. Larisa Dmitrievna quickly restored order with her gavel. We are here on a serious matter. We do not discuss gossip. She examined the case file, then turned to Igor's lawyer. Do you seriously present an evaluation from a certain Dr. Zeman